This is an update video to cover some of the changes that have happened in DAAD Builder since the last update video and since the end of the Pause Ticket series. First changes take place in the graphics editor. For the spectrum target, added the ability to view the paint and ink attributes on the screen. So this is a toggle. If you toggle that on, you'll now just get a black and white image of the screen. And if you draw your lines across, you see them in black and white. Turn that off, you'll actually see what the picture will look like. It allows you to do that amazing trick that you used to be able to do in spectrum coding with loading screens, etc., where you set both the ink and the paper to the same color, and you can write a message like hello on screen. And then when you turn off your attributes, that message appears to disappear, but it's actually there. And for those of you who remember the spectrum, you'll remember the loading screen loading the attributes first, and sometimes there'd be a little message or a picture in there, and then the colours would come in afterwards, and that message or picture would disappear. There were some incredibly clever loading screens where you had a totally different picture once the colours appeared. But that's quite a handy thing for when you're importing a picture into the spectrum. The program automatically tries to decide whether each square should be paper or ink, and it will decide, if most of the square is green, it'll set that to being paper. You might think it should be ink because the next square along the ink is green because there was less green in that square. By turning this on, you can see what the computer's actually decided is going to be paper or ink. It helps get rid of some of the confusion. And also the grid overlay now is red when you're in that view because white didn't show up very well against the white background. I think that's for the spectrum changes. Done a bit of work on the Amstrad. Initially, when we were exporting images, they didn't appear in DAAD Ready at all. At all is unfair. The bitmap data was correct, but the palette data was totally wrong, and all the colours were totally wrong. While fixing that problem, we took a look at the way in which we handled the Amstrad, because the Amstrad works with 4 pen colours, unlike, say, Spectrum, which is paper or ink. We still kept the paper ink idea, but we've called them now draw and fill. This will still be your left and right mice. So you can fill these from your pens, and you can fill the colour in your pens from the swatches down the bottom. To demonstrate that, let's set our ink. So you set your ink by left clicking or right clicking in each square. So left click to set your ink, right click to fill for your fill or your paper. So we'll set ink to be red, and we'll draw a red circle. Our other mouse button is blue, so we can draw a blue button, and then we can fill those. Now if we change our red here to be a different colour, it will automatically change on the screen. That also wasn't happening before, which meant what you were seeing wasn't really what you were getting when you exported. These 4 pens set your palette colour. If you import an image, it will try to match what's on these pen colours. So we go to import, and that's now using the pen colours we have here. So in DAAD, there's a recommendation in the manual that you lock your pen colours to be black and white, your first pen colours, or to light colours, because these pen colours are actually used in rendering the text as well. So if you have a dark or a black in the wrong area, your text will come out black or dark, and you won't be able to read it on screen. But you can actually set your pens here, and they will export correctly. So I think that's it for the Amstrad mode of the graphics. Next thing we added, so obviously my original goal was to try to make this a modern equivalent of the Pause editor. One of the features in Pause editor, and also in the DAAD editing tools as well, was the graphics editor. And within the graphics editor, you had a character editor, which we can access with the letter B, and that allowed you to amend any of the characters in the character set. You could load the character in, and then you could simply toggle the pixels using the space bar. Come back out, you could look at the entire character set as well. You should be able to see the one that I've edited, although I can't spot it in there at the moment. 27. Oh yes, here's the one that we edited here, which is 127. So that was quite a nice feature to have. This is also used elsewhere in DAAD and Pause for the shading of the drawstring characters as well. And then you could have different set of font up here which you could load in. So you could have two fonts by loading the high font or the low font as well. So this was a feature really that wanted to add into DAAD Builder as quite a handy feature to have. I personally don't change from the default font very often in the adventures I write. It got quite a thing in the 80s to change the fonts to the degree that sometimes adventures are almost unreadable with these highly fancy fonts, but they do have a place, and it is a nice feature to have. So we now have a font editor here. It will show the three fonts. We don't support the PC font file currently. We support the 8x6 font, which is used by the Spectrum and MSX targets. We use the 8x8 font, which is used by most of the others, and the Commodore 64, which has the slightly fatter characters, which show up better on the TV rendering for the Commodore. So we can edit any of those characters just by clicking on them, and it will load the grid up with that character. The 8x6 shows an area shaded in grey. You can still draw in here, but this will show the area which isn't rendered, or the last two columns definitely aren't rendered in DAAD. So that part of your text wouldn't show up at all if you're using it. This column is the one you want to stay away from as well, because if you draw in this column, it's likely to touch the edge of the other letters as they come through. So on top of that, we have the ability to import and export those fonts. So we can just use this as a font editor if you don't want to use DAAD Builder for anything else. We can import characters. We can import the whole 256 character font file that DAAD uses. We also support importing the Spectrum fonts, which are characters 32 to 127. It's a much smaller amount of characters in there, and what they'll do is they'll replace just those characters in your font file, and the other characters will be left as part of the default font in there, so it won't just clear out the ones that don't exist. For example, if we go to, I have a file of fonts somewhere, so let's find my file of fonts, and I'll import Chest Burster in that, and you'll see these fonts have now all changed to match. Now where we've imported these, and they're expecting to be drawn in the center of a character grid for the Spectrum, they're in the wrong place. We can just tweak that across by using the arrows on the bottom, and we can get them in the right place for the narrow font. If we were using, for example, the 8x8 font, that wouldn't be an issue. We can do things like flip the font horizontally or vertically. If we don't want to make changes, we can discard it or we can save it. Unlikely you're going to want to do this, but you can invert the character as well. I mean, this might be handy just for making basic spectrum sprites as well. And we can export that font as well. That will export though as a DAAD font, so that will be the whole character grid. The final thing we've added is the ability now to use those fonts in Test Adventure. So if we go to Test Adventure, and it's now using the Chestburster font that we just loaded in, and we can go and change our target. So if we change our target to one of the Commodore ones, we now get the Commodore font on screen. We can edit that font here. So we go into the Commodore font and we take the D character, and let's just add a line across there and save that. Now if we go into Test Adventure, we get that line going through our letter D. So you get a real-time view of what your font's going to look at. I think that's mostly it for the changes so far. Most other changes have just been bug fixes in the past. The font editor is obviously the big one here. The next stage in the roadmap probably will be looking at supporting the conducts like WinAt and PrintAt and those sort of things. We now support the symbols of cols and rows, so if you use those in your adventure, it will show the right values for columns and rows for each of the targets here, and also the text will match those columns as well. So I think if we go to the Amstrad PCW, this is the one with the most numbers of columns of text, so that will stretch across to show those columns of text. Okay, it's only while recording these videos that you suddenly notice that there are features missing that really should be available. One of those was when I was saying about exporting. It'll export the entire DAAD file of 256 characters. If you want to use this as a font editor for a Spectrum, that's not really very helpful. So I've actually now added a second export CH8, and that will export just the Spectrum characters that you would expect to have. That's those characters 32 through to 127. So if you want a smaller font file, you can now have that by exporting here. One other thing I didn't mention was when you export at the top as a zip file, any custom fonts that you've created in your project will now be exported, and they will be stored in the DAAD Ready assets character set folder. They won't overwrite the default fonts in there. They'll add a new one with the first 5 letters of your adventure name, and then whether it's 8x6, 8x8 or C64 on the end. This will allow you to use them in your adventure. Currently you'll manually have to edit the config.bat file to say you want to use your custom font. Also on the roadmap for DAAD Builder will be the ability to export a custom config.bat file, which will allow you to use these fonts and everything just as simply as clicking the compile Spectrum target or compile Commodore 64 target without having to worry about changing your adventure name, which font file you want to use, and all of those extra features. So that is definitely it for this video, and I'll catch you in the next one.